Well, television hosts Waleed Aly and Patricia Karvelis are under fire for suggesting the No campaign was helped along by less educated Australians who couldn't quite understand the complexities of the voice issue, because if they could, they would have voted yes. Have a look.
The biggest dividing line seems to have been education. So if you are in a seat that had high levels of tertiary education, a bachelor or postgrad, then you were at the very top end of the yes vote. And if you had the lowest levels of tertiary education, you were at the low end of the yes vote.
All right, let's bring in Sky News hosts Paul Murray and Liz Storer. Great to see you both. Look, Paul, what he says is technically accurate in that, you know, the affluent suburbs did mostly vote yes. But the rest of it's not accurate in that the whole of Australia can't be stupid.
Yeah, but what I love about these people is that these people were sitting there late last week telling you had to vote a certain way, and then they're the instant experts a couple of days later about understanding why Australia voted exactly the opposite way. It doesn't get to work like that. If you were hardcore pushing advocacy all the way to the end, and then on Monday say, well, look, to be honest, it's always been failing. It's well, hang on, that's just not... That's not the way it's supposed to work. That's just constantly finding yourself on the right side of the media cycle. And I just think that this search for the demographic that proves that I was always right. There's only one scoreboard in an election. You can't read anything into it other than the overall result. 60-40 a year ago were in favour, 60-40 now voted against. As Stephen Conroy excellently said on the show last night, did people get dumber over the year? No, they just learnt more and they didn't like it.
And this was an emphatic result. This is Australians, Indigenous, non-Indigenous,
very comprehensive,
wealthy suburbs, lower socio-economic suburbs, everyone, every state and territory across the country, except for the ACT, voted no.
Exactly. And in fairness to Waleed, he did go on to say that he's not saying that educated people didn't know what they were doing or vice versa. He did try to make sure that people wouldn't be bashing him for this. But the funny part is, like you say, statistic-wise, what he said was accurate. And I think we can very easily flip that there, because the more people are educated these days, university educated, he's specifically referring to tertiary education, the dumber they are.
The more
when it comes to these lefty, yes, and I think there is no
more pro-Palestinian
exactly
as well.
And I was just about to say, and I don't think there's a more powerful illustration of that right now than all these university rallies that we're seeing, all these university movements. Hashtag Free Palestine, waving the flag. These kids have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. They've just been told hashtag oppression is happening somewhere and therefore this is our Black Lives Matter moment, etc. and so on. And they're rallying behind this just like they rallied behind this referendum, etc. and so on. So the funny aspect of what he said here is that these days, the more educated you are, the more brainwashed you are. It doesn't make you smarter. And yes, the lower socioeconomic areas did vote no. And maybe that's because they also see this cost of living crisis that's biting them a lot harder than the more affluent areas. Maybe they see that as more important. And disadvantage being something that's actually becoming more common these days and something that we all have to deal with.
Yeah. Look, sticking with lefty television presenters, Paul Murray, we saw on Media Watch last night, Paul Barry, really, you know, this has been the worst, most barbaric terror attack we've seen since ISIS. And you could argue that it was worse than ISIS because ISIS, you know, they beheaded often male journalists.
The targeting of children. Come on, that's what it was.
Targeting of children, the most vulnerable, cutting babies out of pregnant women's stomachs. You know, why do the likes of Paul Barry and John Lyons automatically take the other side?
Well, I mean,
the anti-Israel, the anti-Jewish side.
I will say about John Lyons is that he spent an awful lot of time in the area, so there's a long history.
Attacking Israel most of the time.
Correct, but I'm saying there's a long history to how he ended up where he ended up. Can I do Paul Barry for a second, though? He had every opportunity in his 15 minutes of television last week to talk about this issue.
Paul Barry, you mean?
But he didn't. Paul Barry didn't talk about it last week. Oh, because, sorry, the show's already been written. It's been done. We can't possibly edit to reflect the biggest story in the world because I suspect the judgment was, oh, look, it's all a little too sympathetic to what's been happening in Israel. Let's just wait for a week and we know what's going to happen, which is that the spotlight will move further and further away from what people felt when they first heard the news. The thing about Media Watch is that I am fine for media analysis programs, but this isn't. It's just the week in Twitter and reinforcing the Twitter narrative, reinforcing that ecosystem to constantly go amongst itself. And when it doesn't like something, it goes off and complains to the umpire. And because the umpire watches that show and listens to Radio National, you know, there's this sort of self-fulfilling machine. But as for the media, it is absolutely legitimate to talk about civilians in this conflict. But the idea to pretend that there is some sort of darker heart in the government that is responding to what happened to it is, of course, ridiculous. Now, I thought about this today and, you know, 6,500 rockets landing on a civilian population because Hamas is in and amongst them is an amazing number. But Hamas is still firing back. So you've got to imagine if your country had been attacked and they're still shooting at you, you're probably going to keep shooting back.
It also ignores, though, that Israel keeps begging the evacuation of these innocent Palestinian. This isn't a conflict against innocent Palestinians. They keep asking for them to be evacuated. Liz, where's Egypt in this? Where's the pressure on Egypt to open its border?
Door.
Absolutely. They're landlocked, so it makes perfect sense that their neighbours would take them in, and yet they've got nowhere to go, which is why this humanitarian crisis is growing. But like you say, Israel keeps saying, look, we've got a job to do. We must retaliate. We know where Hamas is. They're not making any secret of it. We've also got to get our people back out.
Yeah.
And Hamas did that on purpose. They didn't just kill everyone. They took hostages. They knew exactly what they were doing. This was the bait to cause Israel to retaliate. That's what we're seeing now. And Israel's doing its best to tell people, to tell the innocents, get out of the way because we got to do what we got to do. So please leave.
But we talked about this on Sunday night. That message I completely understand. But there's not 400,000 Airbnbs in the south of Gaza. I mean, literally, you've got 2 million people that are already tightly packed in. You're trying to take a big portion of that and squeeze it. The overflow is supposed to go in refugee census to the next and nearest country. If Egypt keeps it locked, and there were some reports that there's been a couple of UN fuel trucks that have gone through to try to help out the hospitals because obviously those need to be put in place. But you just end up, there's only so far you can squish people. And there's got to be some level of relief.
The pressure really needs to come on Egypt now. And we saw that Albanese said he'd spoken to Egyptian leadership. I don't think he clarified who today, but we don't know the outcome of those talks. But anyway, don't know if Albanese will be able to solve the problems in the Middle East, but maybe Biden will tomorrow.
He can't solve a yes-no question, Shari. He can't solve and sell a yes-no question.
Wouldn't be holding my breath.
Let's leave the Middle East to others.
All right, Liz Storer, Paul Murray, we'll see you 9 and 10 o'clock tonight.